Welcome to a true spiritual adventure story like the world has never known. Volume 2, Rise of the First World Teacher, with your host, Dr. James Yogadhi Weldon. Welcome. This is Dr. James Weldon, Yogadhi, speaking to you from Heavenly Mountain in Boone, North Carolina. This is episode 15, my second book, The Rise of the First World Teacher. My autobiography, the things that I passed through, again, they don't really matter so much. But what's important, it appears as though all of these different things are to give you an indication of what is possible. And that stage of higher consciousness is really not so far away. It's closer than your breath, it's closer than your mind, your intellect, and your feelings. It's your very existence. This insight that came, called Santosha, I had no idea about this word. From Rishi a little bit about it. He talked about briefly when he was commenting on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. He said, Santosha, happiness and contentment. Incomparable happiness in life. Santosha gives the greatest happiness. And then he said, just cultivate this practice. I do know now that Santosha apparently is the greatest living joy possible. Something beyond bliss, Ananda. So we're beginning the next chapter. And I began this chapter with a poem also, as I always did. And it goes this way. Once as a child, I dreamed of a stairway that went up to heaven. And I saw a golden path that went on and on. Attentively, I took that path, and I never looked back. So now I know there is such a place where all that can be known is known. Where there is a love that does not die. Where the immortality that each of us prays for is really real. And don't despair. It's all a play. Come on, you'll soon be home. And there you will know that we are one. So riding back on the plane from Florida to Colorado, I began to wonder about all the great sages and saints that the universe has created. The mystery, where do they all go? You know, the universe is a huge place. And our world really in this is just a tiny speck. Like a mote of dust in that vast cosmic vastness beyond. And in the vastness of time and space, the possibilities are endless. And so must be the continuing adventure of the enlightened mind. And I remember a story I read about a great sage who lived in the 8th century in India. And he was the Rishi of Rishis. He was known as Adi Shankaracharya. Adi means the first. Shankara, in my mind, is the blower of the conch. The one who knows the trumpet of truth, if well. Acharya is the spiritual teacher of truth, of that truth. And he was one of the first great spiritual teachers after Buddha and the source of many of the spiritual lineages in that country. All the Swamis come down from that. And though he only lived a few years, only 32 years, the work was completed. So much work is completed during that time. The work he did was unbelievable. During that short lifetime, he compiled, collected, and organized the 4 principal suitcases, if you will, of the Vedas, the tomes of knowledge of India. And he wrote the most incredible wisdom and commented on all the great scriptures of his age. His poetry about the enlightened mind is unmatched. In particular, his description of that state written at the point of his remembering his own self-realization. One of these was called Hastamalaka. His name was well-known Indian metaphor for the experiences of the enlightened mind. The word Hastamalaka tells how his immediate knowledge of the infinite was so obvious as if it was a gooseberry. Amla, fruit held in the palm of the hand. I couldn't help think of that truth. And not in comparison, but I wondered about what happened to me. So opening my eyes, I found an acorn mysteriously appearing at my feet, and I grasped that acorn in my hand in the truth of fulfillment, Santosha. And the enlightened mind apparently opened. Just that one mantra showed me the vast possibilities before us all. Would you believe it if I said that there are such beings such as Adi Shankar and others? Teachers from all lineages, the East and the West, are again in the world right now. One such great teacher, both known in the East and the West, and in the recent past was Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. This sage had just passed away and entered into Mahasamadhi on January 8, 2008, the same time that this last segment, which is so unbelievable, occurred. And I believe that this time signals a time of a new age, as he predicted, of enlightened consciousness. Maharishi always talked about the fact that the highest knowledge exists in all of us like the DNA within our body. Each of us holds within the depths of our being all of this knowledge, just as each cell in our body contains all the information of our body. And once that enlightened mind, which again I believe is the next natural state of evolution, that wisdom will automatically unfold. And then the enlightened mind will spontaneously begin to hear, cognize, and realize, and live a unique expression of that realization. In the ancient past, maybe more than 5,000 years ago, these revelations took the form of mantras that were first experienced in deepest meditation. And Maharishi said these expressions were like seeing the cosmic DNA of the universe. He said that these rishis, these enlightened teachers, experienced these mantras coming within that transcendental space. And then those mantras became a practice for that yogi that would gradually unfold step by step, layer to layer of knowledge. And if this makes no sense, I understand. Listen to some of the earlier chapters. Just give it time. Let it marinate in you. But the point is that, like the DNA in each cell, we have this wisdom within us, and it's gradually unfolding in the most beautiful way possible in your life, through the ups and downs, the losses and the gains, apparently, that we go through. And out of the first word of each mantra would come a second word, and then a third revelation. This is how it unfolds to these seers in the past. And then a fourth, and so forth. And then each emergence is like the gradual unfoldment of a rose, which is really the truth of our life in terms of our experience. And that would be a direct, what they called a cognition of the limitless truth all about us, within us. And literally what these rishis were seeing was the eternal fabric of nature, a fabric of life that has always existed in a place far beyond our physical universe. Perhaps this description makes sense, perhaps it doesn't. Again, if it doesn't make sense, don't worry. I've lived my life being overwhelmed by a series of revelations. But now such insight has come, a little peep. I have to share this experience and speak about it. For I believe many emerging enlightened minds are coming and are here. Why not you? So with this beginning insight, it appears as if through this kind of knowing is now also happening in the West. And if it's true, it means that we are entering a time when the highest wisdom of the East will now be available globally. And I remember, again, that Sri assured me, who I accept as the highest authority, that enlightenment will be coming to many, many people during this lifetime. What many don't understand is that the attainment of the enlightened consciousness mind is not an individual achievement at all. Not at all. Single individuals actually do not become enlightened in a sense. Self-realization is the achievement of a whole culture, in the attainment and realization of something that already exists all about us, in all of us, all the time. It's like the 100th monkey principle. Do you know what I'm talking about? I'll share that story. So on an island lived thousands of monkeys. And they were always looking for food. And there was an ocean all around them. All around them were oysters all over the rocks, everywhere under the water. And for how many generations they weren't able to understand how to get access. But one day, one monkey discovers that if he takes a rock and he hits the shell, it opens up. And then he could gain access to the morsel, the food. Before long, all the monkeys, many of them are doing this. Now they're being fed. But what was unique is that this not only happened there, but it also happened on adjacent islands. They couldn't get over to the other islands. This actually is a scientific principle. And so this consciousness is like that. And I believe that once it truly begins, such insights, which seem so far, far away and so impossible and so amazing, will be available to many. And even if you're not feel it's there, don't worry. Why not behave that way? Why not? Bless the world and realize that you have real power within you, and that what has been difficult to attain, perhaps in the past, will not be nearly so difficult. Such insight can be available to many, yet we don't do this alone. My experience says this insight takes place only through proper guidance and blessings, literally of a spiritual lineage, because the grace and the power flows down. Literally, these beings, if they've lived that awareness, they're in a sense not there. They become hollow and empty, a transparent space through which, in its own unique way, deeper understanding can come. It comes through a lineage, plus the essence of many people now around the world and seeking the truth. Let me ask a simple question to illustrate this point. Why have all the enlightened masters that we know of come from the East? Actually, yesterday on a public talk of Sri Ravi Shankar, somebody asked the same question. Why have such teachers such as Sri Muktananda, Maharishi, Vivekananda, Yogananda, so many great insights, knowers of the reality? Literally, the land and the space of that culture had the ability to produce an enlightened being. For Valley of the Saints in Rishikesh and many other holy places in India, such beings have risen many times. And the vast majority of them have passed unknown. And I really wonder the journey that many are passing through, and perhaps me as an example. Such beings have risen many times, unknown, lived, passed away, nobody knows. And it appears that in the West, the blossoming of such a being has not happened, at least in my mind, at all, or at the very best, it's been very extremely rare. This is just my opinion. Even great beings you may have heard of before, such as Edgar Cayce, who have shown exceptional intuitive abilities. I don't know if you know the story of him. We're only be able to have that state while in a deep sleep state. If you know about him, he was called the prophet, sleeping prophet. He passed away some years back, but he was able to go into a state and do all kinds of intuition, know about people and their past and healing capabilities, knowledge about them without ever meeting them. Read about this if you want to. I wondered why it was only possible in a sleep state, and why have our greatest achievements spiritually in the West in the last century produced, honestly, we must be honest, mostly psychics and mediums. It's something to wonder about. And I believe the reason is that few, if any, have attained the full manifestation of the enlightened mind was because our society as a whole has not been able to sustain and attain that consciousness. And again, this achievement is not an individual achievement. It happens to individuals who happen to have higher consciousness in a certain time and place. And I repeat my firm conviction, I believe that enlightenment is not an individual achievement. The enlightened mind is a manifestation of the awakening of the group consciousness in an entire society. My heart and mind and the great being that we are within me says that this manifestation has now come, and that our time for living this truth has now finally come to many. I can only think back to all the thousands of my really very dear friends meditating day after day for hours and hours on end for decades back in the Golden Domes in Fairfield, Iowa. And it's my opinion that many groups such as these in the West and really all around have been clearing our group consciousness, and that their hard work has now made living the full potential of the enlightened mind now possible for many. And I can only wonder about my knowing of a yogi coming, his name was Muktananda, being born in the West. By the way, this type of knowingness and seeking is very common in the Buddhist traditions. They seek out and look for the reincarnation of the Buddha, at least in Tibetan Buddhism. Has such an enlightened sage like this come before, and their details of their birth been known before their work had ever begun? I think it's rare. And even as I think about the possibilities of this, honestly, every particle of my being thrills at the prospect. And I continue to wonder about it as I have all these years. It's an understatement to say that what happened in the last segment that I described in Florida over those few days completely changed my life. It's totally an understatement. A final obstacle apparently had been overcome with the unfolding insight of that into the nature of sound and mantra and the living existence of fulfillment, Santosha, on the deepest level of my being. It certainly revolutionized and shook me to the core of my existence. After spending that wonderful few days, 2 days with Amrit Desai and friends down there, there was really nothing to say to anybody. I certainly didn't understand what happened there myself. I had no idea, and I'm continuing to unfold even to today. And how could I explain it to my new friends there or anybody else? All that I knew is that a huge weight, a huge block of karma had been erased. Not only in my life, but possibly for the possibility of higher consciousness for many and the limitations of many. See, this state is not an individual achievement. We do the work, we deepen our own consciousness within ourselves. Group consciousness rises, and it just so happens it's like the sun coming up, that those that happen to be sitting maybe on a mountainside somewhere will see the sun come up first. With that release, I saw an insight into the enlightened mind consciousness that I never imagined was possible. That word, Santosha, meant I had no idea. I had no idea at all, except that I knew it was Sanskrit and that it crystallized a new realization and a pathway for my journey. When I looked it up online and I found Sri Sri's commentary in the Yoga Sutras about it, I was really astonished. And I saw that it was something called a siddhi, a perfection for contentment and a technology for opening the door, possibly to the greatest peace and happiness that could be lived. For me, it meant much more than can be conveyed in words. You know, in the past, many of my friends and I received certain techniques for developing these abilities. And now in the art of living, that is happening also. Yet somehow, until this happened, at least for me, they never really fully manifested. And these techniques were described in the chapters of the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali. In 1977, I was traveling around and we were talking about this. And we're even talking about the possibility of levitation in Florida. And people were hopping about. They were actually doing something. This really happened. They would go up, but they came down. But no one I certainly knew of had developed levitation as I saw, fully. So we were practicing many, I would call lesser abilities, but for some reason or another, they didn't appear in a very full and complete way either. And I always wondered why this was the case. When we met with Rishi long ago in that class, as far as I know, my future teacher, Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, was in this class in 1976. Rishi at this time playfully envisioned us flying around the mountains at Lake Lucerne in Switzerland. And of course, this never happened. But on that first program, as far as I know, I was one of the first people that manifested some of these. And Rishi met with me to ask if I had any of these before he taught them. Apparently, he knew more about me at that time than I knew. This is part of the ongoing story. I met with him many times in group, but this was really the only time that we met one-on-one and discussed this. And his question was whether or not I was having an experience of these abilities. And so time will tell. A 12-year period had passed, and gradually over the next 6 months, that insight, that practice that I'd learned gradually grew, became more powerful. It became a practice. It wasn't as if I was practicing this. It was completely spontaneous. I closed my eyes to meditate, and that insight and its energy would begin. Anybody can take a mantra out of a book, but one is given through the wisdom and the knowledge of the tradition that has a hidden energy that makes it run and work. The techniques actually do you, you don't do them. This little peek into the Rishi consciousness and the seed letters of the Sanskrit language they all have a life of their own. These gifts, if you have a chance to be initiated and receive this, they're very powerful. And each vibration has a quality and a nature and a certain realm of knowledge which they unfold. It's very difficult to explain this. So let's end this segment now. There's so many great things coming up. And in the next episode, my return to India, the Silver Jubilee anniversary celebration in 2006. It was really a crowning year of achievement for this organization now that had millions of people involved. I never imagined that it could become anything like this. I wished it. So many people are enjoying the benefit of that around the world. So join me again, more adventures. This is just my personal autobiography to try to provide an understanding and a bridge, an understanding between the East and West, and between many cultures and traditions, that this attainment, what I call the enlightened mind, and my sharing is solely to provide a bridge of understanding. This is a world knowledge of consciousness that belongs to the world. And to talk more about this incredible time in the world that we're in right now, of the rise of the first world teacher. Blessings to you, blessings to your family, blessings to this whole world. Those that have maybe harmed you, look at them perhaps as your greatest teachers. Certainly some of the difficulties that I had in my life, which I'm sharing openly here, have certainly been great lessons for me. And I appreciate you taking the time listening to me. May the divine awaken in you. Thanks for joining us in our YouTube channel, books, podcast episodes on living the enlightened life, and autobiography with your host, Dr. James Yogadhi Weldon.